Cryle Hospital is named, of course, for General George Washington Cryle, a pioneer in military medicine, born in Ohio in the 19th century, and absolutely brilliant in his early research in shock, blood transfusions, blood pressure. He served in the Spanish-American War, took the Lakeside Unit here in Cleveland, Unit number 4, to France in 1915 before the United States entered the war. And then when the United States did enter the war in 1917, he and his colleagues were there to service the needs of the wounded Americans and the British and the French and all the other services. He then came back with his cousin, Ed Lauer, who also was with him in France, and Dr. Bunce and Dr. Phillips. And the four of those physicians then, because of their team approach in the field hospital in France, realized that that was the way to maximize the efficiency of surgical technique through a team. So in 1921, the four established the Cleveland Clinic Foundation. Cryle was dedicated in an open house on Easter Sunday, 1944, and the Surgeon General, Norman Kirk, was here to officiate at these ceremonies. The widow of George Cryle was here, Grace Cryle, and believe it or not, 100,000 people showed up to see the Cryle Hospital. And from that time on, of course, it was a teeming center of activity, many out-of-state visitors coming to see relatives, and you can imagine that the patient population would get way over 2,000. In fact, they peaked in 1945 at over 3,000 patients, and of course they ran out of beds, which meant they had to rent space in Cleveland hotels. So Cryle was a real mecca for the veterans returning from both theaters, the Pacific and the European, for rehabilitation.
When I went into the hospital with Colonel Knight and Colonel Harding, and shook hands with Colonel Harding, he said he had to go check something, inspect something, and he said, I'm not going to say enjoy your stay because I know you're going to have many operations and stuff like that. And he said, but I hope we can make you as comfortable as you can be, if I remember right. And then Major Knight got a wheelchair for me. And I said, I can walk. He said, no, it's a long way. He says, I'm taking down to the orthopedic ward, and we'll get some paperwork done on you. And he wheeled me, and then the nurses came out there, about 5 or 6 nurses. He introduced me to all the nurses. He said, these nurses are going to take care of you. He said, of course, later on, they'll all have different jobs, different wards to take care of. He said, but right now, since you're the only one, you are going to be treated like a king.
I was flown off the beach and back to over to Italy, 18th General Hospital, and then fly on a C-57 or whatever it was, C-54 carrier ship with stretchers, flown back to the United States to Coral Gables, Florida, where I went to Coral Gables and I stayed there 2 days, and this Alabaman officer came into my room and he said, you know, because of the fact that you had been a prisoner, you're entitled to go to any hospital in the United States as long as they're equipped to take care of orthopedic work. So I said, well, I'd like to go to near Cleveland, Ohio, because that's my hometown. But I said, I don't know if they have an Army hospital there. He said, well, he said, I'll tell you what we've got. He says, let me look at my roster. So he looks, he says, Ohio. He said, we don't have anything in Cleveland, but we got a hospital in Parma. I said, well, how do you spell Parma? He said, P-A-R-M-A. I said, that's good.
One of the more interesting and least known aspects of Cryle Hospital in its operation was the fact that between 200 and 300 German POWs were right here at Cryle General, less than 300 yards from a suburban street. And in fact, when you start adding this up about German POWs, why are German POWs at Cryle? Why are German POWs in Ohio? Well, as more and more prisoners are being taken, what better place than to get rid of them by taking them back to the United States where they can be employed and be out of the way of the Allied GIs, the Allied troops.
But that batch that we had then were desert fighters, and they were pretty mean. And one of the guards on duty at that time, they were fixing the street, doing some repair work on one of the streets out there, and German guard, one of the German prisoners, went after the guard with the shovel for some reason or other. I don't know what it was. The guard told him, to drop it, and he wouldn't stop, he wouldn't drop it, so the guard shot him. And he wasn't killed at that moment. He died later on. But anyway, they brought him in, and he was in the next room to me on Ward 23, Ward 23A. I was in a private room, and he was in the next room.
I must have been about 10 years old, perhaps 11, and I remember that we had a relative who was badly burned at Crile, and we went over to visit him, and my brother and I, my big brother, came along for the ride because we didn't get that many rides in the days of gas rationing. And this had been just about my first trip onto the west side. We didn't stay too long with our relative because we were, I guess, a little too rambunctious. So they sent us out into the gardens. Must have been springtime because everything was in bloom and very green, I remember. And while we were walking around admiring it, we noticed all these groundskeepers with these gray uniforms with PW on the back, and it slowly occurred to us that these were prisoners of war. We asked about them and were told offhandedly that they were all Germans. What I remember is that they were very big, and they were very sullen. And they were like the Nazis of the movies, or of my nightmares. And they left an indelible impression.